Okay, Paul, you need to unmute.
All right, now then, hopefully we do have Rick Bennett of Gospel Tangents in front of you.
Yes, you do.
And I welcome you, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters and friends, to the ongoing process of Monday evening Book of Mormon Perspective Forum. And this evening with Rick Bennett from the Gospel Tangents coming, I don't think that he needs much of an introduction because he's spoken to the forum on 3 previous occasions, at least. And the fact that he's accumulating quite an accumulation of us that he has interviewed means that I'm going to mention that as well. But he is the friendly, independent historian at the Heart of the Gospel Tangents LDS podcast, which is an excellent source for Mormon history, science, and theology. And he's interviewed something over 160 scholars and prophets and simple, ordinary people like me. But he also teaches math and statistics at Utah Valley University and freelances as a research biostatistician in dermatology and traumatic brain injuries. So with that and his television, cable TV industries as a sports statistician, he tends to stay a little bit busy. I had the privilege of taking a ride with him in his Tesla at the John Whitmer gathering, and so found him to be quite a sporting individual as well. Locke Mackay and Bill Shepard and Deb Luce have been among the people that he's interviewed, but that list is so substantial with over 100. I think I counted over 150 when I looked at that this last week that he has interviewed, and so it's building a remarkable legacy of a cross-pollinating body of information, particularly, I think, to help people appreciate the commonalities in the Restoration movement. His previous presentations on our forum have included one on the schismatics of the Restoration movement, a tour of Independence, Missouri, and he did a very thorough job of debunking the Spalding manuscript as a source for the Book of Mormon. And so we want to welcome back Rick Bennett of Gospel Tangents. And I think because Deb is wearing one of his sweatshirts, and therefore we're giving that a little bit of advertising as well. But I do appreciate very much the fact that he was able to take a 2-hour interview and turn it into 5 sessions with me. And one of those is worth your time, I think, because it talks about my sweetheart, Teperu Turina Thaura di Barth. But with that introduction, let me welcome him and you, and let us pray. Great idea behind creation, beyond time and space, well beyond our finite ability to grasp or face. We bow in gratitude the season of Advent, anticipating yet again our participation in your coming, another sacred event. For hope sustains us in a world near hopeless as we look at wars in Ukraine and Gaza, Myanmar and Sudan, all marked by 1,000 people killed in the past year, with more than that killed as well in the United States of America. Evidence that instead of hope, many of us live in fear. Yet this evening we meet on Zoom, a 2-dimensional forum, a cross-section of society of ladies and gents, to hear about proposed prophets approached by the angel Raphael, presented by our friend Rick Bennett of Gospel Tangents. We ask your blessing on him, on us, as we contemplate the issues before our Book of Mormon forum and in our tempestuous world, and pray for peace, that we may apprehend the adjustments we need to make to live where the lion and the lamb are curled. And as we examine the call to be prophetic, to be your witnesses, your body, your church, people worthy to live in Zion, we ask for guidance, patience, understanding, wisdom, and your words to be emphasized, that we rely on. So even as new prophets are sought, new ones step forward and present an image of your face, that we appropriately can find ways to love, to appreciate, to critically examine, and establish the Zionic standards where we are occupying your sacred space. And in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. Rick Bennett, floor is yours. If I can
All right, thanks, Paul. See if I can share my screen here. Oh, this isn't, try that again. All right, let's see.
There it is. Angel Raphael has been busy. Thank you.
Yep. All right, so this is kind of an updated, slightly updated presentation of my John Whitmer Historical Association. Unfortunately, me and Paul were speaking at the same time. So that was part of the reason I interviewed him, and now this is his chance to, and the rest of you, to see my presentation. So we're just going to tour a few schismatic groups. Paul had mentioned earlier that I really enjoy learning from these different schismatic groups, and so I was really surprised to find out that the Angel Raphael has been involved in a few of them. So the first question is, who was the Angel Raphael? So he's not a biblical angel. His name, ending in L, means God has healed. And he appears in the book of Tobit and Enoch the First from the 2nd and 3rd century. So it's kind of interesting to me that that this angel has been a prominent part in a few different schismatic groups. Over the course of time, I've been able to interview quite a few of. Well, these are all the people I've interviewed that that we've talked a little bit about schismatic groups. Top left there, Jim Van Cannon from the. Well, at the time I interviewed him, he was with the Remnant Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They've had a schism, and he's now the prophet of the Everlasting Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter Days. Ann Wild, the second top row there, she is the wife of Ogden Kraut, a very important independent fundamentalist. And so she and Ogden have written several books. Denver Snuffer there with the white beard. He's a prophet here in Sandy, Utah. And then we've got Benjamin Schaefer and David Patrick, who Benjamin is in the Quorum of 70 for Christ Church, and David Patrick is the president of the Quorum of 12 Apostles. We talked a lot about Christ Church. Lindsay Hanson Park, we talked a little bit about the FLDS. She's also a big polygamy expert. And so that was a fun interview. Chris Blythe, the blue shirt there, we talked a little bit about Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow, which are still in the news with that murder trial that the Chad and Lori were involved in, which is a terrible story. Then we've got John Pratt, the astrophysicist. Really, I'm going to play a clip from him. He's a descendant of Parley P. Pratt, and so his uncle Orson Pratt had a lot of interesting things to say. But John, at the time of this interview, was in the first presidency of the Reborn Church of Jesus Christ in Brazil, and we'll talk a little bit about him. Then we have John Conrad from the House of Aaron. He was the leader there. Bottom left there, we've got David and Christine Fairman. We will talk about them a little bit more today. They are oh my goodness, they call themselves the Fellowship of Christ, and they are co-prophets together, husband and wife team there. And then, of course, Matthew Gill. who we'll talk a little bit more in this presentation. So anyway, these are just some of the people that I've talked to over the, and this isn't even everybody, but just a good sampling. And several of them have dealings with the angel Raphael. So let's talk about the Reborn LDS Church, probably known as the Brazil Group. You can see John Pratt in the white beard and red shirt there. And then on the left, holding the golden plates, is the prophet Mauricio Berger. So Mauricio is former LDS, and he converted in 1998 in Brazil. He's actually he's of German descent, but he speaks basically Portuguese. He does not speak English. And he claims that the angel Raphael appeared to him on April 6, 2007, and returned with a portion of the sealed Book of Mormon, which was published on March 26, 2019. Now that's a very interesting date because John Pratt there in the red shirt, he has, when he heard that date, he believes that the first vision occurred on March 26, 1820. So he thought that was a very quite a coincidence. And I've got an interview with John where he details how he came up with that date, and I think it's actually him and another guest, John Lefgren, were able, I think, have make a compelling case that the date of the first vision is March 26. So John joined with Mauricio's group. John had served a mission in Brazil, and so basically they're saying that the angel Raphael came and brought back the gold plates to Brazil, and so that's pretty interesting. Unfortunately, I interviewed John in I think it was July, it was the summer of 2021, and he did not get vaccinated and died in October from COVID-19, which was terrible. But you can see there the golden plates. Basically, if you look at those plates, they've got a sealed portion. And in fact, maybe I'm going to play a clip here, but before I do, I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment. And if you can, let's see, can we change it? I want to be big here. I just wanted to show you guys really quickly. This here is the sealed Book of Mormon. So this is Mauricio Berger's group. And so this has already been translated. Going back to the presentation here, John was supposed to help out with the translation of another portion of the sealed portion, but unfortunately he passed away, so he won't be part of that. And so anyway, I just wanted to play a little clip here from John Pratt, and talks a little bit about the angel Raphael. Can you hear that, by the way? I don't know if I need to change my settings.
No, we can't.
You couldn't hear that? Let's see, how do I change my settings? You guys told me how to do this last time.
When you see the first screen after you screen share, there's a box in the bottom left.
Oh, share sound. There it is. I knew somebody knew how to do this. All right, here we go. Hopefully you'll be able to hear it this time.
Bill had Angel Moroni appear to him.
We got it.
First, several angels. Angel Raphael came to him first and told him the long-term thing. And then Angel Moroni comes and spends years with him and 3 witnesses, teaching them what they need to know before he's actually given the plates, the Urim and Thummim, and the sword of Laban. So here's a man, if you open the book, here's a man And his first question was, by the way, why me? You know, which if you read all through the Bible, every prophet's first question, why me? And anyway, but his name is Mauricio Berger, German name, and he's German descent. A lot of Germans in southern Brazil. And he said, why not somebody in the United States? He was LDS, member of the LDS Church. And the answer was, nobody in the United States is worthy to do it, which is quite a statement. Anyway, he translates, he is given the Urim and Thummim, the interpreter stones.
Not a seer stone.
Not one seer stone. He's given the ones in the
Same ones that Joseph Smith
same
used.
ones Joseph Smith used.
So the spectacles and the breastplate.
Well, he
and all
doesn't.
that.
He didn't get, to my knowledge, he didn't get the breastplate. At some point, I think Joseph disconnected them from the breastplate because they were set up to wear the breastplate, which would hold something, which would hold them in front of your eyes like a pair of glasses. There were better ways to do that
Yeah,
with all
didn't
that
fit in very well or
paraphernalia.
something.
Yeah, and so, but there are two stones, and there's one for each eye.
They're clear, so they're kind of like glasses, basically.
Basically, yes. And the Joseph Smith, you've read the descriptions of and it looks like a kind of large pair of glasses.
All right, so there's the description of how Mauricio got the plates and how he translated. So, so it's interesting to me that they claim that the angel Raphael came to the reborn LDS Church in Brazil. How do I change my slide? There we go. All right, so the next group that I want to talk about is the Church of Jesus Christ in Christian Fellowship. So this is Christine and David Fairman. They are co-prophets. They are both former LDS as well. David's first revelation was in 2015, and he started this church around 2016. The interesting thing about their church, you don't have to quit your church to join. You can join his church. It's actually an internet church. So they don't actually meet in a building, they just meet over Zoom. So some of the interesting innovations that they've made in their church is that they ordain women, and they have both the Melchizedek and Magdalene priesthood. So men hold the Melchizedek or Aaronic priesthood. Women hold the Magdalene, which would be similar to Melchizedek, or the Miriam priesthood, which would be similar to Aaronic. And so they are very supportive of LGBT members. They allow polygamists to join. They allow lay members to receive revelation. And in fact, he says, we have something that will offend everyone in his church. And so he also discusses his angelic visit with Raphael. So they have their own revelations. They embrace non-Christian scriptures, including the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, the Mormon Kabbalah. And not only do they have internet church services, but they have internet temple services as well. So they're very, very progressive, both technologically and revelation-wise. So we're going to talk a little bit about David's angelic ordination and how the angel Raphael was involved in that.
Through the first chapter goes through one of the first revelations that I received back when I was still a part of the Salt Lake City Church, and then it has two revelations I had back when I was a kid in high school, and then it has the rest of that particular book is a series of revelations that I had in January 2016 that go over the temple rituals. And then the angel Raphael shows up and explains what was just given to Adam and Eve as they're going through the process. And they're not exactly the same as the rituals that the Brighamites or that the, what's the other group, the Campbellites?
Cutlerites.
I'm sorry?
Cutlerites.
Cutlerites, thank you. Yes, or the Cutlerites out.
So did you have kind of a first vision experience then? Were you called by an angel, or how did that work?
Yes. And I feel really weird saying this, but you can read about it in my book. But basically, what happened was the Lord for a long time was telling me to go to my bishop back when I was a member of the Salt Lake City Church, and telling me to talk to him about being ordained a high priest. And I was just like, you have to get a state calling for that. If you want me to do this, tell them to give me a state calling. And there's one of the things where God's telling me to do something, and I'm just telling him, why are you telling me to do this? And finally, I gave in, and I went to my bishop, and he said, and what I'm about to say, I want to be very clear here. I know this isn't the official policy of that church, but it's just what I was told. What I was told was that I had to either be a grandfather so that I could be in the same priesthood class with the other grandfathers, or I had to have a state calling, and so I needed to just forget the matter. So I went back home, and I got down on my knees and I said, okay, well, I did what you asked me to do. If you want me to make an appointment with the stake president, let me know what you need me to do. And he said, don't worry about it right now. And he gave me some other things to study and do and look at. And so I did that. And one day I felt impressed by the Spirit to pray about it again. And while I was in prayer, an angel came and ordained me. That angel was Raphael. And he ordained me a high priest and said that he was giving me all of the same keys that Abraham had been given. And so all of the keys to the gospel. I didn't understand why. I didn't know why I would need any of this. And I knew, when I received it, I was grateful. I had these priesthood keys that I could use, I guess, at my home. I didn't know what I was supposed to do with them. But I knew I couldn't use them at the church I was going to. So I didn't really understand what the point was. But I presumed that I was going to be getting a stake calling or something. And so then I would be ordained again by someone in the flesh. And instead, later on, I was led to start the fellowship, and I was told that unless I had those keys to the high priesthood, I would not have had the authority to do so.
All right, so that's a little bit of David's recollection on his angelic visitation. Let's see here, Mike. There we go. Oops. There we go. Next person I want to talk about is Matthew Gill from the Restored Branch of Jesus Christ. They're based in the UK. And so this is a photo here of Matthew Gill.
We aren't seeing it, Rick. We still have the Ferrimans up.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Let me stop and reshare then. All right, now hopefully you can see Matthew Gill now.
Yep, we got him.
So, so Matthew is also a former LDS. He's the prophet. His father is in the first presidency. His first revelation was in 2005, and he started his church in 2006. The original name of his church was the Latter-day Church of Jesus Christ. The LDS Church said that's a little too similar. And so they sued him. And so after the settlement, he renamed it to the Restored Branch of Jesus Christ. So just like the Fellowship of Christ, you don't have to quit your church to join his. They also meet over the internet as well. And so Matthew claims that he's received and translated the book of Jeraneck. So these are a group of Jaredite relatives who settled in England and built Stonehenge. Stonehenge is actually, according to Matthew Gill, a Jaredite temple. So so that's pretty interesting. So while Matthew's LDS in origin, it seems like he's embraced a lot of old style RLDS positions. He believes in the inspired version of the Bible. and he also believes that Joseph was not a polygamist. So that's pretty interesting. And I've got a clip here where he discusses the angel Raphael as well. Now, did you receive like an angelic ordination to be prophet?
Yep. Yep, that took place in 2006.
And that was by Raphael?
Yep. That was on the 12th of July 2006.
And did your dad have that too?
He had a similar experience.
Okay.
But in that experience I had, I met Christ, saw Christ, and Joseph Smith, and Janet was there, although I didn't realise at the time who he was. And then, obviously...
And this was a physical, not just a vision, but a physical, they appeared.
Right.
And laid hands on your head, I assume?
Right.
Okay.
Not Christ. Christ didn't lay his hands on my head. He didn't touch me at all. Joseph did. And
so you were ordained by Joseph?
Yeah, under Joseph's hand. Yeah. It's documented. It's in our Doctrine and Covenants. So,
okay.
It's all documented. It's all there. It's all in black and white. Yeah. So I was in that experience. I was taken with Raphael, and I saw Christ, and then he didn't lay hands on me. He just spoke to me, and then I saw Joseph, who did lay hands on me. Once he'd finished, Janet lay hands on me, and then of course we had the call to stone the records.
Okay, so this was before you received the Book of Jeranek.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so that's a little bit of Matthew's prophetic call.
So that
let's see. So wanted to talk about a few other groups where not necessarily the angel Raphael's involved, but we've got the Apostolic United Brethren. You can see a couple of pictures here. The top picture is their church, and then right next door to the left of that is what they have an endowment house, and this is in Bluffdale, Utah. And so if you're familiar with Cody Brown of Sister Wives fame, this is the church that he belongs to. So basically the Apostolic United Brethren and the FLDS used to be one group, and they split in the 1950s. So they're both the FLDS and the Apostolic United Brethren are Brighamite breakoffs. According to their claim is, they technically go back to the 1886 John Taylor revelation of an 8-hour meeting. And in this meeting, they were to continue polygamy even if the LDS discontinued polygamy, which of course the LDS Church did the first time they tried to quit was 1890. They've had a hard time quitting up through the 1930s. And to be honest, the 1930s is really when at the time they didn't really have a name, but it's really what makes up the FLDS and Apostolic United Brethren. Or sometimes the AUB is referred to as the All Red Group. So the FLDS AUB split in the 1950s over a leadership dispute. The AUB was led by Rulon Allred, and they've got a temple in Azumba, Mexico, and then the endowment house, as you can see here, the bottom picture on the right there, is in Bluffdale, Utah. And so I have a picture here of Joe Jessup. He is Rulon Allred's grandson, and so he gives more information about the AUB and a vision with Joseph Smith.
Where fundamentalists go with this, however, is there's a whole nother backstory. There's the story you and I are talking about right now of this 1886 revelation, and then there's a backstory where Lauren Woolley is inserted.
Yeah.
And so-
Was he a witness of the 1886
So
revelation?
yes, correct. So Lauren Woolley was a mail. Essentially, he's a mailman. He's a runner, running mail around to the general authorities and other things like that, other people like that. And his father, John Woolley, is good friends with John Taylor, and so John Taylor was a regular guest at the Woolley farm in Farmington. Up north of the point of the mountain. And so what happens is he shows up one time in September of 1886. He shows up to deliver the mail and then is asked to stand guard outside of John Taylor's room. And John Taylor, as he stands out in the hallway, he starts to notice a glow in the room. And he starts to hear
Woolley
voices.
notices
This
the
is
glow.
Lauren Woolley, yes. And he starts to see a glow coming from underneath the door, and then he's like, wait a second, I don't remember anybody going in there. And he goes out and checks the windows and everything, like, how the heck is anybody in there? And he gets in closer and then realizes that there's voices in there. There are 3 people in there conversing. And at that point, he essentially decides to leave it alone. But then asks John Taylor when he comes out in the morning.
This is like an 8-hour meeting, right?
So that's coming. So John Taylor comes out in the morning, according to Lauren Woolley, in a kind of a glow. And Lauren Woolley says, who was in there with you last night? And he said, well, I spent most of the night with Joseph Smith, with the prophet Joseph Smith. And he says, well, I heard 3 voices. And he says, who is that third voice? And he said, well, I think you know who that third voice was. That was your Savior. And so then that day, Lauren Woolley, they have what is called the 8-hour meeting, where Lauren Woolley then sets up, according to direction of Joseph Smith and Jesus Christ, alternate priesthood authority
outside the church.
Outside the auspices of the church, outside of its direction, should the need arise.
Which it did 4 years
Which
later.
it did 4 years later. To carry on and to make sure, and the covenant was to make sure that a year did not go by where children were not born into the new and everlasting covenant of celestial plural marriage until the Savior returned. And that they would have the ability to then perpetuate that authority down through the generations.
And so this is kind of why Lauren becomes head of the movement.
Yes, this is why Lauren becomes head of the movement, because in the 1920s he starts telling this story. Now, I'm going to get myself in a lot of trouble here, Rick. I'm going to be in so much hot water you're not even going to understand. I tell you that story from the polygamous perspective.
Right.
That's the story.
That's what I want.
That's the story I grew up with. That story is insanely hard to corroborate in the historical record.
Because of the 30-year gap, right?
Because there's a 30-year gap. Lauren Woolley doesn't start talking about it until pretty much all of the men who were supposedly on that first Council of 7 in 86, they're all gone. They're all dead except for his father. And so then he starts talking about it and starts. I one time was given a presentation to a bunch of people, a group in Pinesdale in the AUB, and I called it the alleged 1886 revelation. And oh, boy, did I ever catch flack for that.
And I guess I probably should introduce Joe a little bit better. So Joe grew up in the AUB group, and then when he was in college, he met an LDS girl and then converted to the LDS church. So he's no longer a part of that group, but definitely grew up in it and knows the stories very well. Where's my cursor here? There we go. All right. Wanted to finish off with another group here, the Remnant Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They are across the street from the Temple and Independence. They're a break off of the RLDS Church, started in the year 2000. Got a picture there of Fred Larson, who was, depending on how you count, the first / the fifth prophet. They reject both, as being part of the RLDS tradition, they reject both Wallace B. and W. Wallace Smith as prophets. And so so there's like a several decade gap in their prophets. I guess if you start, I'm going to test my knowledge here. So if you go with Joseph Smith III, Israel, Fred.
The other way around.
Oh,
Fred
Fred,
and-
Israel, and then is it Wallace?
Yes.
Okay, so they of course they reject Wallace, so Wallace would have been the fifth, and then W. Wallace, who was his son, and then and of course they reject the current prophet Vesey and McMurray and that sort of thing. So so the interesting thing about the Remnant Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is they believe in lineal succession. And I guess it was on my slide there. If I would read it, I have the proper order there. And Frederick is a descendant of Joseph Smith through the Larson line, through a female. So I had an interview with Jim Van Cannon. He was a counselor, one of Fred Larson's counselors in the Remnant Church. And following Fred's death, they had a secession crisis, and he has started the Everlasting Church of Jesus Christ. Oh, in the latter day, and I'm surprised that's not plural, latter days. And so that happened following the death of Fred. So the interesting thing is, and I do remember asking Jim this, would they keep up with the Smith line, and they have not. So Jim is not a descendant of Joseph Smith, and neither is Terry Patience. The cool thing about this was Deb Luce was with me in Independence, and I knocked on the door. And Terry Patience answered the door, and I said, "Oh, do you know Terry?" "Yes, I do." And so I got a spur of the moment interview with Terry Patience, and with this presentation, we've been talking a lot about visions, and so so I asked if Fred had any sort of a vision, and so here's Terry's response. So it's interesting that you do go back to that scripture in the Doctrine and Covenants for your succession, because wasn't Fred Larson picked because he was a Smith descendant?
I'm not sure that that's quite the right phrase.
Okay.
And I'd have to go back to the Doctrine and Covenants. There's a section in here where he comes forth and reveals to the council that he is that the Lord wants him to be the successor, that the Lord had called.
Oh, so Fred had a revelation essentially that he should be the leader?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. And I think the fact that he was a descendant of Joseph certainly aided him in that calling and that realization, because I've heard that all of the Smith people are always somewhat in fear that, oh my gosh, someday I may be called upon. And who wouldn't, if your dad or your uncle or whatever was a prophet of a church, a major church, and yeah.
Huh. Was there a angelic visitation or anything? Do we know, or was it just
for Fred?
For Fred, was
I
it
don't
just
think he's ever
revelation?
indicated that there was an angelic visitation.
Okay. Because I know the Strangites, because I'm all into restoration history.
Right.
Strangites are like, no, you need an angel to come.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that's why they haven't had another prophet since, because
no angel has shown up.
Come. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so that's why they don't have a prophet anymore. They're just led by a high priest now.
Yeah. Huh.
Their apostles all died out and everything as well. So
no, I don't think so. I don't think Fred ever talked about it, at least. If he did, he left that in a conversation with his counselors somewhere along the line, and I have no privy to that particular bit of information.
Okay.
So I don't think that's the case.
So you were just a
Just
regular run-of-the-mill apostle?
yeah,
not
just a
the
runner.
president or anything?
No, not the president of the quorum.
Okay. Fred appointed you to be the new prophet. Is that it?
Yes. While Fred was in his last days, he was unfortunately hospitalized, and he had two visitors come to him. Carl Van Cannon came to his room one day, and Kevin Romer, and we talked a little bit
He's the
about
presiding
Kevin.
bishop.
He's our presiding bishop.
And
was at that
descendant
time.
of Aaron.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Levi.
Anyway, so that's the current prophet Terry Patience with the remnant church. So maybe I'll go back to that slide at the very beginning. Just thought I would kind of give some sizes of some of these groups. I think Jim, so top left there, Jim's group is still pretty small. I think they've just got 1 or 2 congregations there in Independence, so not real big. Let's see, and I don't know how big the Brazil group is. I'm trying to remember. I think they've been trying to see if they can take over the temple lot in Independence, and so I would guess they have a few hundred, maybe a few thousand. I'm not sure. Matthew Gill's group, I think, is still pretty small, just a few dozen, I think, and then I haven't been able to get any good numbers from David and Christine Fairman either. And then you guys might know the Remnant Church, how big they are. I think they're just a few congregations there as well. But anyway, so I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Rick. This is just a fascinating sketch. I would like to hear more from Christine. You said they're joint prophets, but we didn't hear anything from her.
In that interview, she's much more shy. And so David did most of the talking in that interview, but I could probably find a clip there. We talked a little bit because he has way more revelations than she does. I think she's only had 1 or 2. And she was really nervous and not even sure that she wanted to share them. So she's definitely much more shy of the 2.
Understandable. Okay. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. The opportunity to grab a hold of that icon down at the bottom that says reactions, and then raise your hand and be recognized by Deb for the next one in line for a question is yours. Or if you want to raise your hand and wave it, she sometimes picks people up and puts them in line that way too. And I do welcome any of you that have joined us that I haven't previously greeted, but what a fascinating assortment of people to have seen the angel that isn't mentioned in the Bible.
That was what was so interesting to me, how Raphael just kept coming up over and over and over.
Well,
and giving new scriptures that were completely different. And yeah, so it was pretty funny.
It was Gabriel, I believe, that was the angel that appeared to Muhammad. And so we're talking about different angels predicate different churches.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I think Terry's got his hand up
Terry,
there.
go ahead, please.
I have a question about where do these groups get their members from? Are they basically relatives or just good friends, or how do they proselyte to get people to join?
So let's see. Let me go through the groups. First group was the Brazil group. So they're primarily based in Brazil, but you know, John Pratt, before he died, he lived here in Utah. And because he spoke Portuguese, he could communicate with the prophet very well. And that's part of the reason I think he was in their presidency. So I would assume, well, let me back up, because when John Pratt died, I had not actually published his interview, and I got a message from a woman in the Netherlands, I think, that told me that she had died, that he had died, and I was so shocked to hear that. So, I mean, in a sense, it's a pretty international flavor. David and Christine, they're based in Ohio. The Fairmans, they've really tried hard to do an internet church. I think it's hard to get numbers on them and where they come from, because they don't have a building. You know, it's completely internet. They have internet temple services. It's talked about putting an altar in your own home and that sort of a thing. Matthew Gill, I believe, yeah, a couple dozen. I would say mostly family members, although he does get a lot of people that watch his church services, a few hundred. The AUB, so they have a big, so the Prophet, they have a bit, so they're kind of spread out, in at least in Utah. They've got a big, kind of their headquarters is in both Draper, Bluffdale area, South Salt Lake, basically. And then the current Prophet, I'm trying to remember what the name of that city is. It's I think it's Salem, Utah. It's probably 45 minutes south of Provo, I would say. And I've been really trying to get a member of their group on, Marianne Watson, her husband, I can't remember his name. He's the Prophet. Marianne has done a lot of work in Mormon history, and especially polygamous history. But I don't know if it's because her husband's a prophet now, she didn't want to speak. And so it was nice to get Joe, even though Joe's not a member anymore. But Joe actually lives in Montana. There's a group in Pinesdale. In that interview, they've split again, kind of had a little bit of a secession crisis as well. But I think they're, well, and then they have a big area in Mexico too. Say that again.
Didn't the Jessups come out of Hilldale and Colorado City?
Yeah. And so there's another group called Centennial Park down there, and that's probably 30, 45 minutes east of St. George in southern Utah, Arizona border area. Well, and of course, Warren moved to Texas, and so he's in a Texas jail right now. And then the last one was the Remnant Church, not to be confused with Denver Snuffers Remnant Group. The RLDS Remnant Church, mainly in Independence, although I do believe they've got some people in Africa as well, and they're trying to grow. Denver Snuffers Group, and he's of course, he claims to have seen Jesus. Maybe I should have included him in this one as well. But I would say his is mostly in the Salt Lake City and Boise, Idaho areas. His is more kind of an internet, kind of a libertarian kind of a group. Denver keeps saying he's not in charge, but everybody sure looks to him as being in charge. So they're talking about building a temple one day, but I don't know.
Thank you.
Yep.
Earl, are you raising your hand or you're just adjusting your screen?
You're muted.
There's Val. I see Val.
Okay. Earl, did you want to say something?
No, I was just checking something. Thank you.
Okay.
It
All
is
right.
very interesting lecture. I appreciate it.
There you go. Thanks, Earl. Val, go ahead, please.
So I think these people are really interesting, and they start to reveal kind of strengths and weaknesses in the restoration movement. Like, the strength of it is our openness to revelation and continuing connection to heaven. And the weakness is what showed up with Hiram Page. The whole thing can fly to pieces if everybody becomes a prophet, but we want prophets, but we need, how do we hold together? And the way they keep splitting apart, you talk about these churches and they keep splitting apart. So do you have any thoughts on, I mean, I think probably the institutionalization, at least in the LDS church, maybe some of the charisma goes out, or at least that's what you have to worry about, that the institutional part bleeds away some of the charisma, and these folks are all highly charismatic, but I'm just sort of struggling here with what are the implications of this? What are the forces in play as you interview these folks? What are the strengths and weaknesses of these kinds of movements and developments? You have thoughts on that?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned Hiram Page, because I brought that up in the interview with David Fairman, because he's like, hey, anybody can have a revelation. And I brought up Hiram Page, and he says, well, I don't actually know what Hiram Page's revelation was. Maybe it was okay. But yeah, I mean, especially in his group, because it's very, I hate to use the word libertarian, but it is like anybody can have a revelation, and if it's a revelation to you, that's good enough. He might not canonize it, but he accepts a lot of revelations from members of his congregation, and then
what do you mean by accepts? Because the same, in the LDS church, anybody can have a revelation. That's affirmed a lot, right?
Right.
You can, in fact, you should seek revelations. Everybody should seek revelations. So the question is always, what is the authority of that revelation? Or
well, and so they will vote on whether it should be canonized or whether that's just a personal revelation to them. And so
from anyone,
like
right?
I said,
you're saying they might canonize revelations from any member of the church then. Okay.
Like a Hiram Page kind of a thing.
Yeah. Okay.
And but of course the congregation has to agree with it. But I mean, he was like, if the Quran is scripture to you, that's great. If the Bhagavad Gita is scripture to you, that can be your own personal scripture. That's fine. I mean, they try to be as open to everything. I mean, as far as gay polygamy, he's like, if you can get God in your gay polygamy marriage, that's fine with me. And
so
the
one
polygamists, because he tries to appeal to the polygamists and the gay marriage people, and they don't really play in the same. They don't want to play together.
So with the voting, if they're voting within the congregation, that is a kind of recipe for more splits, right? So like 49% want to say yes, and 51% say no to a revelation. It's just the sociology of it's all really interesting. And but I mean, it's kind of underscoring a weakness of the Restoration movement that's been dealt with in various ways by our different churches. But I mean, it's a strength and a weakness. It's both combined together. But anyway,
right.
That's all I had to say about it.
Thanks, Val.
David Kaysen, did you have a question?
Well, I just wanted to let you know, you were talking earlier about the angel Raphael. Back in I think it was in the 60s, the Strangite Church had a man come from France whose name was Caffio, and he said he was ordained by Raphael to be the successor to James J. Strang. And it was quite a controversy here for several years, but he finally went back to France. He didn't speak English and everything. He wrote to us for quite some time, but Billy Shepard probably knows more about it. He was here at the time.
I would love to hear that from Bill. Do you know anything?
That it was Raphael as well.
I hadn't heard that. Bill, do you have anything on that?
I do. I'll have to look it up though.
Okay.
I've got a pamphlet, I believe, that he put out.
Yeah, I have a copy of that pamphlet that he put out, and his son tried to continue on, but the doctrines that he was professing and everything just couldn't be accepted by them and everything. But it took about, I think it was about 5 or 6 years before they finally rejected him, outright. But it's just interesting that his angel was also Raphael.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that story. Thanks for sharing that. That's awesome.
Okay, Blair, go ahead, please.
Hi, Rick. I've been bouncing in and out of Zoom for the last 40 minutes, trying to understand what's going on, and much of it I missed. But I did pick up on that portion of the Brazil plates. And I want to know if you have any picture of those Brazil plates.
So yeah, I did show it on my slide. Let's see if I can share it again here. Just one second. Whoops. There we go. Let me see if I can share my screen. You can see them there.
Yes, but I wonder if there's any picture of the details.
Oh, so he purposely told me he didn't want to show the details. I will throw another thing. In fact, this is why John contacted me, was because somebody in Independence that was aware of this had asked, "Hey, can you give us proof that you have the golden plates?" And so a letter was sent, which was the Hoffman forgery, and said, well, they look like this, which was identified as a Hoffman forgery. And so I had interviewed Casey Griffiths, and he had talked about this Hoffman forgery. And so because of my interview with Casey, that was why John contacted me and said, hey, I want to talk about that forgery. Here's why it's not a forgery, and blah, 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 which I did not find very convincing. But they have explanations for that. And John did tell me that he purposely didn't want to put a lot of detail on there, on the pictures, but he said that I could use any of the pictures from his website. So.
Okay, let me give you a bit of background from my perspective of the characters.
Okay.
In 2017, I met with President Vesey and Apostle Lachmakai for a brief lunch. I had some questions to ask of him of my translation and gave him some materials. At that time, they came up with a picture from brass that did have a character on it that I recognized, and the characters around it. And I recognized it was a copy of the Hoffman forgery.
Oh, were you involved in that story?
I was involved with that story.
That's funny.
That's delightful.
Anyway, it was a forgery.
Right.
The Hoffman, no doubt about that being a forgery. He finally admitted it. Okay. That I wanted to get in there. And now that I'm here, Paul, I want to ask you, I would like to set up another presentation on the role of belief in the plan of salvation. And I would like to make that presentation within, let's say, sometimes after the end of January.
All right, February is open, and so yes, I'll be happy to accommodate that.
Okay. Thank you. Rick, I'm sorry I couldn't get your presentation. It was just so chopped up, and I had to sign on back about 5 times to get to where we are right now. Okay, thank you very much.
You'll have to watch the recording.
February 5 is open, Blair, if you'd like to claim it.
February 5. Okay.
And give me your topic again.
The role of belief in the plan of salvation.
Very good.
Right. James Lucas has his hand up. Go ahead, James.
There we go. This is from your presentation, Rick. I think I can guess what the answer is, but I'm fascinated by the question, so I'm going to ask you anyway, since you're the person who's made yourself kind of an expert on all these disparate groups. So we clearly have these, let's see, what is it? Centrifugal, that's going apart forces in the restoration that, all these groups are constantly splitting off and so forth. And of course, for those of us who are familiar with restoration history, I mean, this is from the very beginning. This has been going on, from the 1830s, has been a feature of our movement. But there have been, in both restoration and general Christian history, there have sometimes been opposite forces that have pulled things together. You have, for example, in early Christian history, you have the tradition of the ecumenical councils, Nicaea and so forth, where, again, this was often only came into effect because of political power of the empire after Constantine. But you would have these councils where they gather all the bishops and kind of hammer out some sorts of agreements that resulted in sort of traditional Orthodox Christianity. And in the Restoration movement, an excellent example of this is the coming together of the reorganization, where there were, quite a few scattered groups and scattered people, and the reorganization and Joseph Smith III was able to kind of pull a lot of folks together to make a, quite unified and coherent church out of them, that, carried on as an important feature in the history of the Restoration. So my question is there any indication that any of these disparate groups, there could be any method by which any of them might pull together to become more than a few handfuls of people on the internet, or a few handfuls of people who are related, or in the case of the fundamentalists, sort of a few very extended families, because of course their families are very extended, but nonetheless, it's my impression of the fundamentalist movement is that it basically grows by growing those kind of core families, as opposed to bringing in lots of converts. So anyway, I was just wondering, is there any indication, any method that you could think of that might bring together some of these modern disparate break-off groups into any kind of under any kind of a common umbrella to become an organization large enough to be actually durable and institutionalized and constitute a new church of the Restoration?
So there's two things that come to my mind when you ask that question. Number one is Patrick McKay. He's an apostle for the Restoration branches, and he's the one who's really trying to see if we can reunify. I think he would love to get LDS and RLDS back together, and I don't see that happening. I see the desire on his part, but I don't see, like, the LDS church is so big compared to all the other groups. Why would they want to compromise on anything? So I don't see that happening. The other thing is on the other end of the scale, and I spoke with Joe Jessup about this. A lot of fundamentalists, they refer to the LDS church as the mother church, and Joe talked about the polygamous fundamentalists like to be, under the eaves of the church. They're not inside the church, but they're trying to get as close as they can under the eaves. And on the one hand, they would really like to see a reinstitution of polygamy in the church, which I also don't see happening, and that these different groups, FLDS, AUB, LDS, would all rejoin together. And so it's funny because, and I've spoken with Patrick McKay about this, and he's violently against polygamy. And so you've got these groups that everybody wants to join together, but nobody's willing to compromise. And I shouldn't say nobody, because I have to say it's been interesting as I've learned a little bit about the Temple Lot Church and the Community of Christ specifically. Have had some agreements where people could transfer not only memberships but priesthoods. If you could prove you were a priesthood, a high priest in the Temple Lot group, you could transfer that over to the Community of Christ and vice versa. I don't know if those agreements are still in place, but that's the kind of thing it would take in order to get some unity back. But I love the idea. I try to build bridges. I think we should get along with all of our Mormon cousins, as I like to say. But it's hard, when you got people that I hate polygamy and I love polygamy, and how are you gonna bridge that gap? Like that's almost unbridgeable. So.
No.
I will say this also, I've spoken, there's some BYU professors, I know Casey Griffiths was one, and they've tried to work on some interfaith dialogue with especially RLDS and restoration groups and that sort of a thing. And, especially since the 1960s, there's been a huge thaw in relations, especially among the historians community. I mean, I consider my Community of Christ friends dear, dear friends. And, that wasn't the case. We were enemies up until, the 1960s when there was that thaw. But I mentioned, because I've talked to some fundamentalist polygamous Mormons, and they still feel very shunned by the mainstream LDS church, and there is not. I have heard through the grapevine where the LDS church has tried to help, especially with like FLDS communities, but they don't want the bad publicity associated with, oh, the LDS church is helping out with these former FLDS. Like, they do not want any publicity at all. They're willing to help out and do what they can, but as far as like the thawed relations between LDS and Community of Christ, it hasn't happened, and I don't see it happening anytime soon. Just because the LDS church is now so against polygamy that we don't want to be stained with getting tarred with, oh, we're helping polygamists. Are they going to bring polygamy back? That kind of a thing. So there's still there's not been a reconciliation between polygamous groups and LDS groups, at least publicly. Privately a little bit, but not publicly.
Okay. Thank you. Interesting insights.
Okay, Paul, and then Terry. Go ahead, Paul.
Thank you, Brother Rick. I appreciate your friendship and thank you for it. I recognize that we share so many commonalities in our efforts to try to build from our common relationships. I would point out that having had that extended relationship with Rena, who was one of the first women ordained in the RLDS church, that there's a good deal of tension between people who left to become restorationists because they did not want women to be ministers, and those of us who are married or who are ministers of the gospel and are female. And so that is a difficult one to reconcile. However, a month or so ago, Ron Smith of the Restorationists and Lori Long at Lamoni held a joint worship service together in which they shared testimony. Thanksgiving, I was invited to a dinner at the Temple Lot in Independence, sponsored by the LDS for Community of Christ and Restorationists. And Patrick McKay was one of the speakers, and so was Eric Scott, who happens to be my second cousin, representing the Community of Christ. And it was a delightful dinner and fellowship. And so there are bridges being built, and I would like to hope that this forum could be one of those bridges. Let me get my question before you, though, because with all this marvelous gathering of information that you have, and with the Community of Christ currently in the process of selecting a new prophetic leader, we've been going through a series of prayer and discernment sessions, and this month our Quorum of 12 will be meeting with President Vesey having basically stepped aside to allow the Quorum of 12 to consult with all the information that they've been gathering from those of us that sent in our letters of recommendation and inspiration. And so I'm curious what you would, you came to our conference and you know us pretty well. What advice do you glean from the experience with Raphael and all of the other groups that you would offer us in the selecting of a new prophet?
That's way above my pay grade. I will say, I believe it was President Grant McMurray, who I believe he was the one who coined the idea of we want to make the Community of Christ a prophetic people. And I will say I have holy envy for that. I love the discernment process you guys do with your general conferences, where I don't want to say dissent is encouraged, but it's welcome, and much more welcome than it is in my church. And democracy is tough. You have to accept people with different opinions. So I'm impressed that the Community of Christ allows members to be so involved in the revelation process. It's definitely not very efficient, but I don't know how else you can do it in a better way. And so I don't have any advice for you, but I am just very impressed with how you communally try to get revelation in your church, and I wish my church was a little bit more like that.
Thank you. It's very kind.
Okay. Were you done, Paul?
Yes.
Okay. Terry, go ahead, and then Val. Whoops, Terry, you're muted.
There we go. I said, I'm just very intrigued with all the divisions that are continuing within the Restoration. I had no idea that was still going on. And sort of to respond to Rick's idea of unification, we all know that the LDS Church is the biggest. And my concept of that is the golden rule. He who has the gold rules. And so I don't see much unification, at least in public, for any of that. But I just want to express my gratitude to everybody that I've gotten to know in other units that, we share a lot of the same things, but we don't share a lot of things as well. So, but it's just nice getting to know all of you and participating. And I thank you for that.
Yeah, I think these are super fun meetings. I wish I could attend more often, but sometimes the Jazz are playing. Now, by the way, is that Dave Fairman that I see in here? It is. I didn't know you were here. This is great. We got to turn it over to Dave to see if I messed up anything.
Just a couple of things. So we don't see ourselves as a church. We see ourselves as a fellowship. So our whole thing is we're an ecumenical movement. I do have a ministry where I talk to people who are unchurched or going through what I call spiritual PTSD. We probably have about 500 people or more globally, but people aren't really very active because of the fact that we don't do any proselytizing. Our biggest evangelist at this point is a brother by the name of Rick Bennett, who interviewed me one time. So, and I also do want to mention that, and Rick, I thought I sent you a copy of this. Since our interview, I did publish the 5 books of Moses from the plates of brass, and part of the mission that I was called to was to translate the brass plates, and that is one of the things that I'm working on also. But I don't want to take over and like so much time or take too much away from Rick, but I do want to just throw those couple of things out there that Rick left out.
Oh, well, I do not have a copy of that, but I would be happy to get one.
All right, well, I'll message you after this. I could have
Yeah, no
sworn
problem.
I even checked my messages here on my Facebook Messenger. I could have sworn I sent you one, but I will make sure you receive one, my friend.
Okay.
Thanks for doing this, Dave.
Dave, let me jump in on that if I may. Notice this is a Book of Mormon Perspectives Forum, and since you're here, I certainly would like to invite you to continue to join with us. But if you have a presentation that you would like to give that that is topical, thematic, I'd be happy to discuss. So let's please exchange emails so that we can follow up with a date for you in the near future.
Absolutely. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Can I share one more thing real quickly?
Sure.
The past year, my wife and I have been trying to travel out to all these smaller groups. We have a brother who's in England who was a part of Gil's group and no longer is. He reached out to Gil for me, for us, I should say. I had a brother reach out to Mauricio. I went out and visited with another brother, another friend of mine, with the Nimha group. I've done everything I can to try to reach out, myself and some others that are with the fellowship. And this idea of pulling everybody together, I can't give up on it because I love the restoration. I love the gospel of Jesus Christ. I love the work that the Lord called Joseph Smith to start. But it is like pulling teeth, getting people to talk to each other. And if you are part of a congregation and you can recommend people, hey, talk to each other. We're all a part of the same religion. That's my soapbox for this evening. Thank you.
Have you talked to Patrick McKay?
No, I have not.
You should get in contact with him. I can help you get in contact with him. So
okay, that'd be great.
He would definitely like that. So by the way, since somebody asked me how big the groups were, can you give us an update on your numbers? Because I didn't have a good answer.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's hard to say. So I'm gonna tell you a quick funny story. At one point, I was like, there really aren't a lot of people that participate. I make all the videos, I do a lot of the stuff, and I was in this Facebook group, and I usually call myself a non-denominational messianic Mormon Kabbalist, which is a mouthful. So I put that down, and then like a couple of weeks later, I got this notification that someone else had commented on there, and what religion are you, or what church do you belong to? And I went back and the person had put the Church of Jesus Christ and Christian Fellowship. I'm like, who are you? I haven't met you before. And I start going through there. The Church of Jesus Christ and Christian Fellowship. The Church of Jesus Christ and Christian Fellowship. Like I didn't know most of those people, so I had to go in and change mine. Also, the Church of Jesus Christ and Christian Fellowship. So I like to say that we have somewhere around 500 or 600 people that affiliate with us because that's just on our mailing list, and we've had a lot of people that will write in or say, I want to be a part of this movement. But because we're online and people don't really show up to a building, it is exactly like you said, Rick. I don't have an exact number. it is hard to tell, but I just know that people like what we're doing and like to say that they're a part of our group, and that's the best I can do.
And so there are other groups with your same name. Is that what you're saying?
No. These are people who are on the mailing list, on the email list. They're people that they may not have actually talked to them, but they consider themselves part of the fellowship. But I haven't met everybody. Excuse me. I don't know everybody. Most of the people that I do talk to, I talked to them one time, and they talk about how exciting it is. They love everything on the website, and they want to be a part of this, but then they don't return to emails or phone calls after that. And you have to keep in mind, like, I don't have any interest in starting a church, so I'm not really like pushing growing this thing. I'm whatever the Lord's asked me to do, I'm doing that. And if it becomes something, that's great. If it doesn't, the Lord's got enough prophets out there doing stuff. I'm comfortable with everybody just being happy where they are, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Let me add to
you were
that.
here sooner.
Let me add to your earlier comments, though, because I just had a beautiful conversation with Josh Gailey this last week. Let me go back to the beginning there. Roger Rose is the current administrator at the Kirtland Temple. Roger and Ryan Saltzgiver, who is the LDS archaeologist in charge of historic sites, and now Josh Gailey, who is evangelist of the Monongahela group, who is also has his background in archaeology, and I have begun to form an exploratory committee preparing for a bicentennial project at the Kirtland Temple, inviting people from all across the restoration movement and beyond to participate in the 200th anniversary of our restoration, and to be able to find the remains of the print shop that burned there in January of 1838, and perhaps more than that, but at least go after that particular fascinating set of artifacts that will include the type from the First Doctrine and Covenants, 1835. They'll include the type from Emma Smith's hymnal and the 1837 edition of the Book of Mormon. And so right now it's just an exploratory committee working on trying to put together a plan by which by 2030 we can actually have a full-scale archaeological investigation there with participation, support, and volunteers from all across the spectrum. My hope is, and to get the very enthusiastic support of Josh Gailey was for me a most gratifying step this week.
Very cool.
That was awesome.
Okay, whoops, where'd Val go? Is Val still here? I think we lost Val. He had his hand up, but he's not here now.
Hopefully he'll come back because he comes up with good questions and comments. And I would apologize if I bumped him off.
I don't think you did. Whoops, there was somebody. Who's that?
David's got a hand up. David Kaysen.
Okay, go ahead, David.
Well, I hope I'm not interrupting them, but this is all kind of new to me, so I'm very interested in, and I just wanted to ask him if, Rick, I'm sure you're familiar with that book, The Scattering of the Saints.
Yes, John
Are
Hamer.
you in the? Are you? I'm sorry.
John Hamer and Newell Bringhorst wrote that book.
Are you intending or planning at any time to make kind of an update or a refusion of that?
No,
I'm
aware. No. I mean, the funny thing is, I interviewed John back in January. In fact, the book is right there. I could go grab it because that book is about 10 years old. If you really want an encyclopedic book, I wonder where I can find that one. I would recommend Steve Shields. His newest edition contains about 400 to 500 schismatic groups, and it's much cheaper on Kindle, and it's easier to search on Kindle. But it does have it in. It finally published in paperback, and so he's got at least a. Well, sometimes it's only a sentence or two, because sometimes it's hard to find out about these groups. And some of them are defunct, I will say that. But yeah, trying to remember what's Divergent Paths of the Restoration.
Yeah, that's a note in the chat box. Dave put that a note in.
Oh, there it is. Yeah. And
I'm sorry, what was that again?
it's in the chat. Divergent Paths of the Restoration by Stephen Shields. That is like an encyclopedia of Mormon groups, and that's only a year or two old. And I think the 5th edition is the latest edition. So so that's fantastic. John's book, Scattering of the Saints, they look at kind of the major groups. And I do remember with John, I was like, hey, what about the Peterson group? And he's like, now remind me who that is again. And so Steve is definitely much more comprehensive than John is. John mainly concerns kind of the major, the Brighamites, the Josephites, the Strangites, the Hedrickites, kind of the main groups, and who breaks off. The Elijah message is another one. But these groups are popping up all the time. It's really hard to keep up with them all. And I think Steve Shields has done. I mean, he started doing this when he was a teenager. It's been going for 30, 40 years. he's always finding new groups.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Most of my research is based on John Hamer, Neil Bringhurst, and Steve Shields. So, except for, I'm lucky that I have people like Dave that I can interview, and Terry, and people like that. And that's kind of what I'm interested in, is getting a personal interview with these people.
Okay, so Val did come back in, or he's trying to here. So we'll let you go ahead, Terry, and then we'll have Val come in.
Yeah, I'll be quick. There's a group of that left the church probably in the 1950s, called the Order of Aaron, and they live in basically. You're familiar with them?
Yeah.
Have you ever been to visit them at Eskdale?
I have. Yeah,
Very
out
good.
in Eskdale. I interviewed. He was on my first slide. I didn't really talk about him, but Terry. No, John Conrad is the high priest for the House of Aaron, and they're a consecration group. Eskdale is literally the middle of nowhere, Utah. I'm telling you, it's really out there. But they were. John was super cool, super fun. There's another guy named Arlo Stevenson who lives in Independence, and then John's son or daughter married Arlo's son or daughter, and anyway, so that was kind of a fun little connection, because I knew them both. But
Okay, just thought I'd bring that up.
yeah, they don't consider themselves restorationists. Actually, they're more Messianic Christians, I guess I should say. But they definitely have some Book of Mormon roots. But they don't even use the Book of Mormon anymore.
Guys, sorry, I've got to leave. I just got a call. The burglar alarm's going off at work, so I've got to go help the police. So I gotta leave. See y'all later.
Good night, Deb. Thank you.
Good
night.
Val, go ahead.
Yeah, I got frozen there for a minute, but I'm back. So this is a follow-up on Jim Lucas's question, but also a lot of the economical talk that's been out there. You mentioned that I think it was the Temple Lot and the Community of Christ have agreements to recognize each other's priesthoods. And as a kind of measure of the degree of ecumenicism, I think the acceptance of rituals, like which, if any, of the different branches of the Restoration accept the baptisms of the other groups, so that the rituals are recognized. Like in the LDS Church, no other priesthood, no other baptisms are accepted. It all has to be done in-house. But I'm wondering if, the Restoration branches, do they accept an RDL, a Community of Christ baptism, and vice versa? And I know this is even a little bit larger than just our Restoration movements. Like the Catholics will accept some Community of Christ baptisms. If you join the Catholic Church, they won't accept any LDS. They have to, but I think they have to interview the Community of Christ folks to see what they understand about God's nature, and if they give acceptable answers, then their baptism is okay. But so I don't know if you know the answer to this, Rick, but maybe other people here would too. To what extent, like all of our priesthoods trace back to Joseph and Oliver, so we all have the same sort of priesthood chains. And to what extent do we accept priesthoods, and to what extent do we accept baptismal rituals across denominations? That's my question.
Paul would probably answer that better than I will. I don't know if that agreement between the Temple lot and the Community of Christ is still in place, but I know in the 1910s, 1920s, there basically you could just transfer records, and the baptisms and the priesthoods would be recognized. I don't know about other restoration groups. I would suspect, well, I know. I'll just tell this story really quick. There's a guy by the name of Otto Fetting, and he was a member of the community of the RLDS church. I guess this is back in the 20s, 30s, right before the Depression. He left the RLDS church and joined the Temple Lot Church, and the Temple Lot Church recognized his RLDS baptism. And then Otto had a revelation to rebuild the temple on the Temple lot, and they actually dug a gigantic hole, and then the Depression hit, and they weren't able financially to finish the temple, and so then it was just a big hole forever. And then Otto basically got kicked out of the Temple Lot Church because he had a revelation in which he said that everybody needed to be rebaptized. And so the RLDS Church and the Temple Lot Church have been like, hey, we don't rebaptize anybody. Your baptisms, if it was, like you said, we all come from Joseph and Oliver. If it was good enough in the Community of Christ, it's good enough for us. And so they kicked out Otto Fetting, and so he started his own group, the Church of Jesus Christ with the Elijah Message, and they're based there in Independence as well. I would assume, and maybe somebody can correct me better, but I would assume that kind of within the RLDS breakoff groups, they probably recognize each other's baptisms and priesthoods, but maybe somebody can give me a better answer because I'm not 100% sure. Paul?
This is a tough one because I think Rick, you're right. Fundamentally, the fact that the Community of Christ accepts the baptisms of anyone who claims to be Christian in terms of sharing communion is a major opening shift from what we used to be as the Organized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is closed communionists. So restorationists have that inheritance, and so in our discussion with Ron Smith a couple of weeks ago, he emphasized close communion rather than closed, and that distinction strikes me as being an interesting one. But the idea of the Community of Christ being open to the people who are from whatever Christian denomination that claim the Christ are therefore welcome to share a communion is the most open that we have become. Now, of course, we do recognize anybody else's official authority for marriage. And so whether that's a judge or a minister if it is someone who is legally authorized, then those marriages are authorized. We do not, as much as we used to, hearken back to the lineage of priesthood. And there is more and more discussion, I believe, in our church about the priesthood of the believers. For there's a certain inclination to think that building the hierarchy of priesthood is not an equitable approach, and therefore is something that, well, one of the benefits of having women be ordained is that it has reduced that dichotomy from those who are eligible for priesthood from those that are not. And so to embrace more of a concept of the priesthood of the membership, to the belief that the highest calling is to be a member of the body of Christ, that is gaining, I think, significance in the community of Christ at present. David has his hand up, and I'd sure be happy to yield to him because he's my older brother and knows more than I do.
Knows more is a real question. It depends on which areas you're talking about. And I'm certainly not in a position to speak officially for the church, but it's my understanding that the church, the community of Christ, accepts the water baptism of any Christian denomination. If you want to become a member of the community of Christ and have the baptism of the Spirit, that is reserved for within the priesthood of the community of Christ. But the water baptism is totally open. Paul mentioned the communion. I think at this point, we don't even require you to say you've been baptized. If you're willing, if we have a statement that is read before the communion that basically welcomes anyone who accepts Christ to the table of Jesus Christ, and then we serve communion. So baptism isn't even required for that particular ordinance. Other ordinances like ordination, for example, you have to be a member. But evangelist blessing, it used to be called patriarchal blessing, that can be done for anybody that wants the evangelist or patriarch to bless them. The blessing of babies can be done for anyone. Administration for the sick is open to anyone who wants it. Let's see, Paul mentioned marriage. Of course, marriage, you have to realize, is not a religious requirement, it's a state requirement. The state requires the marriage laws. You have to get a license if you're going to get married in any of our states, license from the state. So if you were married by a justice of the peace, that's in the community of Christ, that's still an acceptable marriage. If you want a sacramental marriage, then we'll certainly do everything we can to provide with you a sacramental type marriage. Let's see, any other ordinances, Paul?
I would like to emphasize that the privilege of for example, I had one of my former students who for whom I conducted the marriage ceremony, not members of our church or of any church I'm aware of, and he and his wife struggled for some 10 years to have a baby, and then they found out about the blessing of babies, and so my daughter and I were called upon to go to St. Joe to bless that baby. One of those highlight experiences to be able to share the ordinances of the gospel with people who are not affiliated, but who were friends of the church and anxious to participate in that which will provide blessing for their child. The same is true in terms of praying for those people that need the blessing of laying on of hands. The experience that I've shared with you with Abigail Barnes is a good example of that recently. And to see the resurrection of that young lady for 2 weeks ago to show up at Shawnee Drive congregation where their parents to say thank you for praying for us, even though they are more closely associated with the Methodists than anybody else, but here they drove 2 hours to come share with us because they knew our congregation had been praying for them. The fact that when we pray together, we reach beyond our chasms and denominational boundaries. For we believe that God hears everybody's prayer. And in that basis, then we are all of his children, and to be able to appreciate our equity in terms of that design, able to share organs, able to share blood, able to share the beauty of life, to be able to share the blessings of life through the Holy Spirit is something that is not confined to the priesthood.
Bill Shepherd, do the Strangite folks have a baptism ritual, and is it acceptable? Could somebody come in with a baptism from the Community Christ or LDS or whatever and have those count?
No, they would require a rebaptism. I have something I like to read if I can. It relates to the general subject you've been talking about. This is from an article I published in Dialogue years ago about the One Mighty and Strong. In concluding, I wrote, Mormonism is a religion with the core belief that God communicates with his chosen people by revelation. Furthermore, even though it has been a fundamental belief that the prophet receives revelation for the church, it is also a fact that membership carefully monitors the prophet's behavior and teaching to see if they are acceptable to the members. When members are perceived to have strayed from the truth, members often accuse them of being rejected by God and announcing that a restoration of true, quote unquote, true principles must take place. This process of rejection and restoration has been and will continue to be spearheaded by individuals claiming divine authority from God to purify and stand at the head of the institutional church. If the church leaders cannot be overthrown, the strategy usually is to convert members from an institutional church into an alternate true church.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah, Rick, I think that pretty well summarizes what you presented, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Summarizes it from Dialogue, which would be 40 years ago.
So by the way, Bill, we talk about you this week with my David Boyce interview. Can't remember if that's tomorrow or the next day. So you'll have to check that out. We said lots of good things about you because you're a good man.
All right. Well, thanks for that.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I don't see any other hands, but fascinating discussion, delightful contribution to our picture of the spectrum of Mormonism. And what a fascinating assortment of people we are. And who would imagine there's many people that had a visit from the angel Raphael. Just fascinating. Any other questions or comments? Certainly want to leave the floor open. On the other hand, we are approaching 10 o'clock and so it's about time for me to sing us off. Good night, the Lord is watching o'er you. Good night, his blessings go before you. Good night, and we'll be praying for you. So good night, may God bless you.
Good night.
And,
Thanks, Paul.
David, I'd like to get your email if I could, so that we can pick up a date for you.
Yeah, sure. What's the easiest way for me to